There are moments just before death when time stretches, when the air thickens, when silence falls too fast, when you feel something in the room that wasn't there a moment ago. Some call it intuition, others fear. But a few have described something else. Not a presence, not a light, but a thread. A flicker of movement at the edge of vision, a silver glint. A whisper that doesn't sound like sound, more like the weight of something passing through you. Some people have seen it between strangers, some between loved ones, and some, most disturbingly, between themselves and someone still alive. They say it looks like a thread, impossibly thin, glowing faintly in the dark. It stretches from one body to another. Sometimes it coils around objects. Sometimes it disappears into the ground. But it always leads somewhere, always forward, always connected. In ancient texts and oral traditions, there are fragments, half-sentences, glyphs, rituals, all referencing some form of connection between deaths. Not souls, not karma, but an actual metaphysical chain. One death triggering the next. Not by violence or curse, but by something older, something orderly. A few mystics called it the line of unwinding. Others referred to it as the weight of echoes. In one obscure manuscript from a forgotten French monastery, it was described as the tether of endings, soft as breath, sharp as time. People who survive near-death experiences sometimes describe seeing it. Even for just a moment, they'll say they felt something snap loose, or tighten, or pass through them like a pulling. And those who claim to have seen the full chain describe something worse. It doesn't end. It stretches endlessly, through cities, through graves, through the eyes of strangers, through you. There are even whispers of those who learned how to follow it, not just to see who's next, but to trace it backward, through the links of every person who has ever died, to find the source, or worse, the anchor. Because if there's a chain connecting every death, someone had to forge it. And if you can see it, even for a moment, it means you've already been added. In nearly every ancient culture, there exists a symbol for the connection between life and death, not as opposites, but as points on a path. The Greeks imagined the moirai, or fates, weaving the lives of mortals into a tapestry. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured it, and Atropos cut it. But what if that thread didn't stop with the cut? Some versions of the myth hint that Atropos didn't truly sever the thread. She passed it on, rolled it inward, redirected its tension toward the next soul. Overlooked lines in Orphic fragments describe the fates not as ending life, but transferring its weight. The thread didn't fall to the ground. It tightened around something else. In Sanskrit texts, the concept of prana, life force, is sometimes visualized as a current, a flow that moves from body to body, leaving echoes as it passes. One Vedic poem, rarely cited, speaks of a silver river strung from eye to eye, each drop a pulse left behind. Commentators dismissed this as metaphor, but some didn't. Buried in an untranslated Tibetan scroll kept in a monastery near the border of Nepal, there is mention of a phenomenon called Tsal Lung Ka, roughly translated as the sound line of dissolution. Monks undergoing deep meditation, those approaching death willingly, sometimes reported hearing a soft vibration just before passing, a tone that didn't echo outward but moved through them, continuing onward, as if their final breath had become the first moment of someone else's. Even in modern clinical studies of near-death experiences, a small but persistent number of patients describe something oddly similar. A connection, not to light, not to family, but to a stranger. A brief sensation of being tethered to someone they've never met. A flash of memory that isn't theirs. A vision of a death they didn't die. These reports are often categorized as hallucinations, the mind's last desperate grasp at narrative, but the patterns are too consistent to ignore. One woman, revived after 43 seconds of cardiac arrest, described seeing a thin thread tied around her wrist. It stretched across a dark room toward a flickering shadow, a man sitting alone in a chair, crying. She had never seen him before. But a week later, while recovering in the hospital, she passed a waiting room and saw him. The same man, same chair, mourning someone else. She didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. The thread was gone. Some researchers believe we're born connected, that the moment of birth latches us onto a hidden pattern of deaths, an invisible chain where each life leaves a residue, an imprint that pulls the next toward it. Death, in this view, isn't an end. It's a relay. A psychic researcher in the 1970s claimed to see these connections during seances. She described them as silver cords so thin they could pass through light, yet so heavy they could bend time. She began mapping what she saw, creating diagrams of deaths and their echoes. Her notes suggested that mass casualty events, wars, plagues, disasters, weren't isolated tragedies, but knotted points in the chain, places where the thread tangled before continuing forward again. She disappeared in 1982. Her final notebook ended with a sketch of a human figure surrounded by rings. At the center, written in red ink, "The weight is building." Other traditions speak of the chain in subtler ways. The Jewish concept of Gilgul, the cycle of soul reincarnation, includes the idea that unresolved spiritual fragments can transfer between lives. In Kabbalistic circles, some mystics believed that death always reaches through someone else, a link, a bridge, a ripple from one soul to the next. Some even claimed that sudden, unexplained fear, especially when seeing a stranger, could be a subconscious recognition. That person's death is part of your chain, that your link is pulling closer. But the most disturbing reports don't come from mystics or monks. They come from ordinary people, people who, for no clear reason, suddenly find themselves watching someone and knowing they're going to die. Not as intuition, not as superstition, but as certainty, a pressure in the chest, a faint tone in the ears, the unmistakable sense that they are connected, and that connection is tightening. And once you've felt it, once you've glimpsed that invisible line, you don't stop thinking about it. You start wondering who's at the other end, and whether the chain is pulling you toward them or pulling them toward you. Not everyone who sees the chain runs from it. Some try to follow it. They're not well known. There are no documentaries or academic studies. You won't find them on television or speaking at conferences. But if you know where to look, in private archives, in obscure forums, in handwritten journals that were never meant to be published, you'll find stories of people who claim they learned how to track the line from one death to the next. They call themselves different things: the carriers, the bound, the trace walkers. But their goal is the same: to map the invisible pattern of endings. One of the earliest surviving references to this practice comes from a 15th century text called La Chaîne Silencieuse, or the Silent Chain. Its author, who signs only as FD, describes a method of entering a meditative trance while holding an object belonging to the recently deceased: a ring, a lock of hair, even ashes. According to FD, if done properly, the practitioner will hear a faint ringing, a harmonic tone that points them not toward the afterlife, but toward the next link in the chain: a name, a location, a face. FD claimed this process was not spiritual, but mechanical, like feeling tension in a thread and learning which direction it's being pulled. He cautioned against repeating the ritual more than once. His final paragraph reads, "I saw the third. She was still breathing." In the early 1900s, A British mortician named Caleb Wren claimed to have documented hundreds of unusual passings. Deaths that, while unrelated in circumstance, shared patterns, identical timing, mirrored poses, identical final expressions. He believed he was witnessing the chain in real time. Over decades, he mapped these connections using red thread pinned across his walls. When asked about his work, he reportedly said, "It's not prophecy, it's physics, spiritual physics. Every death creates weight. That weight must go somewhere." He died in his workshop, strangled accidentally by the very thread he'd pinned across his study. More recently, in a scattered online network called Echopath, users share dreams, symbols, and sensory experiences linked to death. The group claims that certain people are more tuned to the chain, especially those who've experienced a near-death state or profound trauma. One user described seeing faint threads in crowds, lines stretching from people's backs like spider silk, tightening when someone was near their end. Several users in the group independently reported a recurring phenomenon: hearing a faint metallic snap or ping just moments before learning that someone had died. Sometimes a loved one, sometimes a stranger on the news. One man reported hearing the sound while boarding a plane. 3 rows behind him, a woman collapsed from an aneurysm before takeoff. He'd never seen her before, but in his words, "The thread had already passed through me." Some members of Echopath tried to take it further. They began tracing not just deaths, but the lives that followed. People who were born shortly after someone died. Children who exhibited strange behaviors, uncanny memories, or irrational fears that didn't match their environment. One story tells of a boy in Turkey who, from the age of 3, feared stairs. He said they felt wrong. At age 6, he described a vivid memory of falling down stone steps, even though he never had. When researchers checked birth and death records, they found that a man had died in the same town after falling down a long staircase exactly 1 day before the boy was born. Coincidence, perhaps, but these patterns multiply when you know what to look for. A hospice nurse in Poland reported that at the moment one of her patients passed, she saw a thread pull upward and vanish into the ceiling. The next night, while visiting her sister, she held her newborn niece for the first time. The baby reached out, not toward her face, but toward the exact same place the thread had vanished, and smiled. Not everyone who sees the chain understands it. Some think it's reincarnation. Others believe it's a karmic network, a weight-balancing system that ensures death is always paid forward. But those who try to follow it rarely remain unchanged. A few go silent, a few vanish, and a few begin to hear the chain all the time, even when no one around them is dying. Especially then, because the more links you trace, the more likely you are to find your own. Most who glimpse the chain describe it as subtle, a glint, a pull, a silent tension. But a few hear it break. And when it does, everything changes. The sound is not loud. Those who've experienced it describe a sharp, metallic crack, like a violin string breaking in the next room, or the distant snap of ice splitting across a lake. It comes without warning. No flash, no pain. Just a sound that seems to arrive from inside the skull. Some say it's followed by a rush of silence. Others say something else replaces it. A low hum, a thudding echo, or a voice repeating their name in reverse. Those who've heard it report the same immediate sensation. Something is wrong. Not physically, not emotionally, existentially, as if a part of reality that was holding them in place just let go, like something frayed loose, and they were no longer anchored. Some faint, some cry, a few laugh, not out of joy but relief, or madness. In 2004, a hospice volunteer in Ireland claimed to have heard the snap while holding the hand of a dying patient. As the man passed, she said she felt a sudden sharp vibration in her fingers, followed by the sound. That night, she dreamed of a long hallway filled with broken threads, cut ends dangling from the ceiling like vines. She woke up with a nosebleed and the smell of metal in her sheets. She left her post and never returned. Her final journal entry read, "One link broke, another grew in its place, and I think it's mine." Sometimes the snap comes before a death, in rare cases, days before. People report hearing it while alone, reading, washing dishes, walking their dog, only to receive news shortly after that someone they know has died. But more chilling are the cases where no one dies, and the person who heard the snap begins to unravel instead. A man in Brazil documented weeks of insomnia, paranoia, and memory loss after hearing the sound in his sleep. He became obsessed with mirrors, said he could see faint threads hanging from his reflection's eyes, but not his own. He eventually shaved his head and covered all mirrors in his home. His final recording said, "I was next, but the thread didn't hold. Now I'm floating between." There's a theory among those who study the chain. If you hear the snap, it means you weren't supposed to die yet, but your link tried to break anyway. A false trigger, a rupture in the sequence. And when that happens, something else has to fill the gap. Not another person. Something else. A weight, a memory, a name that isn't yours, but now feels familiar. This is when the chain stops pulling you forward and begins to fold backward. A priest in Ukraine once described this process during a deathbed confession. The dying man had been silent for hours, unmoving, until he suddenly whispered, "I saw myself in the chain, but younger, facing the wrong way." When asked what he meant, he smiled and said, "I'm not at the end, I'm at the middle, and he's still coming." He died seconds later. No name was ever found for who he was. Some believe the chain is not linear at all, that it loops, spirals, turns in on itself, that some people die into their own birth or pass their echo down a bloodline, that when the chain breaks, it sometimes reconnects at a different point. And when that happens, the person doesn't realize it. They just start dreaming of people they've never met, places they've never been, lives they never lived. One woman began painting unfamiliar faces. Every week, a new one. She said they came to her in dreams, always weeping, always whispering. You heard the sound too. One night, she painted herself, a version of her 20 years older, wearing clothes she didn't own. She hung it in her hallway. The next morning, the painting was gone. In its place was a small piece of thread, coiled like a question mark. Not all who hear the chain snap disappear. Some remain, but they speak more softly, move more slowly. They begin to act like they're trying not to disturb something delicate, as if afraid that another wrong step might tear the line again. Because once the chain breaks, there are no guarantees. The rules change. You may find yourself tethered to something that was never meant to touch you. A memory not your own. A death that hasn't yet happened, but now belongs to you. And maybe that's the final price. You don't just become part of the chain. You become its next link. Most people live their whole lives without ever seeing it. The chain stays hidden, thin as breath, quiet as memory, tucked just beneath the surface of the world. And maybe that's mercy. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to feel it. In crowded rooms, at hospital bedsides, even in your own home. A tension in the air, a faint shimmer between you and someone else. And suddenly, death stops being random. It starts feeling organized. What would you do if you could trace that chain forward? Would you want to see who's next? Would you try to stop it? Would you follow it? And what if it led back to you? Some say the chain is a burden, a system designed to carry the weight of endings across time. Others believe it's a message, a silent invitation to remember that no death is isolated, that every passing stirs the next. That somewhere, even now, a thread is tightening around your name. So ask yourself, have you ever felt that moment? The stillness, the pressure, the cold trace of something pulling through the air, right before the phone rang, right before the news came, right before someone you knew stopped being there? If you've ever felt that, even once, then maybe the chain brushed you too, and maybe it left something behind. Tell me in the comments. If you saw the thread connecting you to the next death, would you follow it? If this story left you with questions you can't shake, or if something about it felt too familiar, like something you felt before but never knew how to name, then like this video, subscribe for more, and return with me to the forbidden. Because the chain is always moving, and one day, you'll feel the pull.